Colonel Thaddeus Whitmore stood frozen in the doorway of his Georgian mansion's parlor, his weathered hands trembling as he clutched a bundle of love letters. The parchment crackled between his fingers like autumn leaves, each word a dagger thrust deeper into his already wounded pride. His wife of 15 years, the beautiful and refined Margaret Whitmore, had been conducting a passionate affair with his business partner, Jonathan Hartwell, for nearly 2 years. The discovery came through his most trusted house slave, Samuel, who had found the correspondence hidden beneath loose floorboards in Margaret's private chamber. Samuel's dark eyes had reflected genuine sorrow as he handed over the evidence, understanding the devastation these revelations would bring to his master's household. Thaddeus read each letter with growing rage, his face flushing crimson beneath his graying beard. Margaret's elegant handwriting detailed intimate encounters, secret meetings in Charleston, and worst of all, her complete disdain for her husband. She called him a brutish fool and a relic of a dying age, words that cut deeper than any physical wound he had endured during his military service. The colonel's mind raced with possibilities for revenge. His reputation as one of Georgia's most influential plantation owners hung in the balance. The Whitmore name had commanded respect for 3 generations, built on the backs of over 200 enslaved souls who worked his vast cotton fields. Margaret's betrayal threatened everything his family had constructed. As thunder rolled across the darkening sky, Thaddeus made a decision that would echo through generations. He would not simply divorce Margaret or cast her out in disgrace. No, his revenge would be far more creative, far more devastating than anything society could imagine. The punishment must fit the crime, and Margaret's crime was the destruction of honor itself. Margaret Whitmore descended the grand staircase that evening, her emerald silk gown rustling against the mahogany banister. Her auburn hair was perfectly arranged, and her porcelain complexion glowed in the candlelight, betraying no hint of guilt or concern. She had always possessed an ethereal beauty that made men stumble over their words and women whisper behind their fans. Thaddeus waited in his study, the letters spread across his desk like evidence in a court trial. When Margaret entered, her green eyes immediately fixed upon the damning correspondence. Her face paled, but she maintained her composure with the practiced grace of Southern aristocracy. The colonel's voice was steady, controlled, though fury burned beneath the surface. He detailed her betrayal methodically, reading passages aloud that described their intimate moments and her plans to leave him for Jonathan. Margaret listened in silence, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white with tension. When he finished, Margaret finally spoke. Her voice carried no remorse, only defiance. She admitted to the affair without shame, explaining that she had found in Jonathan the passion and intellectual stimulation that Thaddeus had never provided. She spoke of feeling trapped in a loveless marriage, bound to a man who saw her merely as an ornament to display at social gatherings. Thaddeus absorbed her words like physical blows. Each justification she offered only fueled his determination for revenge. He had expected tears, pleas for forgiveness, perhaps even genuine remorse. Instead, Margaret's cold acknowledgement of her betrayal revealed the depth of her contempt for their marriage. As the grandfather clock chimed midnight, Thaddeus outlined his terms. Margaret would not be divorced or banished. Instead, she would remain at Whitmore Plantation, but under conditions that would strip away every shred of her dignity and social standing. The specifics of his plan remained unspoken, but the malicious gleam in his eyes promised something far worse than public humiliation. The following morning, Thaddeus summoned 7 of his strongest field hands to the plantation's overseer quarters. These men, Samuel, Moses, Jeremiah, Isaac, Benjamin, Caleb, and Joshua, had served the Whitmore family for years, their bodies bearing the scars of countless lashings and their spirits seemingly broken by decades of bondage. Samuel, the eldest at 42, had been born on Whitmore land. His intelligent eyes and quiet dignity had always set him apart from the other enslaved workers. Moses, a powerful man with hands like tree roots, had been purchased from a neighboring plantation 5 years prior. The others ranged in age from 25 to 38, each chosen for their physical strength and perceived loyalty. Thaddeus stood before them in the dim quarters, his presence commanding absolute attention. The men kept their eyes downcast, as was expected, but tension filled the air like smoke from a smoldering fire. They knew something unprecedented was about to occur. The colonel's proposal was delivered with chilling precision. Margaret would be given to these 7 men to do with as they pleased, whenever they pleased, for the remainder of her natural life. In exchange, they would receive their freedom papers upon his death, along with a substantial sum of money and safe passage to the north. The men's reactions varied from shock to disbelief to carefully hidden calculation. Samuel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, while Moses's massive frame seemed to shrink inward. This was not liberation. This was participation in their master's twisted revenge scheme. Thaddeus made it clear that refusal was not an option. Any man who declined would face immediate sale to the brutal sugar plantations of Louisiana, a fate worse than death. Those who participated would be protected from all legal consequences and would ultimately gain their freedom. The pact was sealed not with handshakes or signatures, but with the heavy silence of men who understood they had become instruments of a white man's vengeance, their own humanity sacrificed on the altar of his wounded pride. Margaret's world collapsed that evening when Thaddeus explained her new circumstances. She would remain in the main house, but her life would no longer be her own. The 7 men would have unrestricted access to her person, and any attempt to resist or flee would result in their immediate execution. A burden of guilt he knew she could not bear. The first night, Samuel approached her chamber with reluctant steps. His weathered face showed no triumph, only the weary resignation of a man forced to participate in an act that violated every principle he held sacred. Margaret sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing her evening gown, her hands trembling as she stared at the floor. Neither spoke. The silence stretched between them like a chasm filled with unspoken understanding. Samuel recognized the trap they were both caught in, she stripped of agency and dignity, and he forced to become an instrument of her degradation while his own freedom hung in the balance. Margaret's tears fell silently onto her silk dress, each drop a testament to her complete powerlessness. She had always wielded her beauty and social position like weapons, commanding respect and desire wherever she went. Now she was reduced to a pawn in her husband's cruel game, her fate tied to men she had never truly seen as human beings. Samuel stood motionless near the door, his own internal struggle evident in the tension of his shoulders. He understood that this arrangement would destroy them all. Margaret through humiliation, himself and the others through forced participation in their oppressor's revenge. The night passed without physical contact, but something fundamental had shifted in the plantation's social order. The carefully maintained boundaries between master and slave, between white and black, between powerful and powerless, had been deliberately shattered by Thaddeus's vengeful scheme. When dawn broke, both Margaret and Samuel emerged changed, carrying the weight of their shared degradation into an uncertain future. Weeks passed in a strange, suspended reality. The 7 men took turns visiting Margaret's chamber, but what occurred behind those closed doors defied Thaddeus's expectations. Instead of the degradation he had orchestrated, something entirely different began to unfold. Samuel, drawing upon his natural leadership, had quietly organized the others into a pact of their own. They would protect Margaret from the worst of her husband's intentions while maintaining the appearance of compliance. Some nights, they simply sat in silence. Others, they shared stories of their lives before bondage, their lost families, their dreams of freedom. Margaret, initially consumed by shame and self-pity, gradually began to see these men as individuals rather than property. Moses spoke of the wife and children sold away from him years ago. Jeremiah revealed his ability to read, a skill that could have cost him his life if discovered. Isaac shared his knowledge of herbal medicine, learned from his grandmother who had been brought from Africa. The woman who had once dismissed enslaved people as invisible fixtures of her privileged life found herself confronting the full humanity of those she had never bothered to truly see. Their dignity in the face of impossible circumstances humbled her in ways her husband's revenge never could. Meanwhile, Thaddeus observed from a distance, noting the men's regular visits to his wife's chamber, but remaining unaware of the true nature of their interactions. His satisfaction at Margaret's apparent degradation was tempered by a growing unease. She seemed to be adapting to her circumstances with unexpected grace, showing none of the broken spirit he had anticipated. The plantation's other enslaved workers began to notice subtle changes in the 7 men. They carried themselves differently, spoke with quiet confidence, and seemed to share some secret knowledge that set them apart from their fellow bondsmen. This unexpected solidarity between oppressor and oppressed would soon evolve into something far more dangerous to the established order than Thaddeus could have imagined. Margaret's metamorphosis accelerated as autumn arrived at Whitmore Plantation. The woman, who had once spent hours arranging her hair and selecting gowns, now found purpose in clandestine activities that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Using her access to the main house, she began stealing food, medicine, and supplies to distribute among the enslaved quarters. Samuel had taught her to see beyond the plantation's manicured facade to the suffering that sustained her former lifestyle. She witnessed the brutal whippings, the inadequate food rations, the families torn apart by sales, and the constant fear that permeated every aspect of enslaved life. Her guilt over years of willful blindness became a driving force for action. The 7 men, emboldened by their unique position and the promise of eventual freedom, began planning something unprecedented. They would use their protected status to organize a network of resistance throughout the plantation. Information would be gathered, escape routes mapped, and resources stockpiled for a mass liberation attempt. Margaret's knowledge of Thaddeus's business dealings, social connections, and travel schedule proved invaluable. She revealed which overseers were most brutal, which neighboring planters might be sympathetic to their cause, and when the plantation would be most vulnerable to organized action. Jeremiah's literacy became crucial as he began forging passes and freedom papers using materials Margaret smuggled from her husband's study. Moses used his strength to create hidden caches of weapons and supplies. Each man contributed skills and knowledge that had been suppressed under the brutal system of bondage. Thaddeus, consumed by his business affairs and satisfied with his wife's apparent subjugation, remained oblivious to the revolution brewing within his own household. He saw only what he expected to see, a broken woman, accepting her punishment, and loyal slaves maintaining their assigned roles. The irony was not lost on Margaret that her husband's revenge had inadvertently created the very conditions for his own downfall. Winter brought new urgency to their clandestine operations. Word had reached the plantation that slave catchers were increasing patrols throughout Georgia, making escape attempts more dangerous, but also more necessary. The network Samuel and Margaret had built now extended beyond Whitmore Plantation to include sympathetic contacts in 3 neighboring counties. Margaret's transformation was complete. The vain, self-absorbed woman had evolved into a strategic thinker and fierce advocate for justice. She used her remaining social connections to gather intelligence about underground railroad routes and abolitionists operating in the region. Her correspondence with former friends, carefully coded, provided crucial information about safe houses and sympathetic conductors. The 7 men had become leaders among their fellow enslaved workers, inspiring hope where once there had been only despair. They organized work slowdowns, equipment sabotage, and information gathering with military precision. Samuel's natural charisma and Moses's physical presence commanded respect, while the others contributed specialized skills to their growing resistance movement. Thaddeus began noticing decreased productivity and minor acts of defiance throughout his plantation, but attributed these issues to typical winter doldrums and the influence of abolitionist agitation from the north. His overseer reported increased incidents of attitude among the workers, but nothing that suggested organized resistance. Margaret's nights with the 7 men now involved detailed planning sessions. Maps were drawn on scraps of cloth, escape routes memorized, and contingency plans developed for various scenarios. They had identified 43 individuals ready to attempt escape, including women with small children who would require special assistance. The plan they developed was audacious in its scope. Rather than a few individuals slipping away under cover of darkness, they would orchestrate a mass exodus during the spring planting season, when Thaddeus would be traveling to Charleston for business. The timing would maximize confusion and minimize the chance of immediate pursuit. Their success would depend on precise coordination, unwavering courage, and the element of complete surprise. Spring's arrival brought both opportunity and increased danger. Thaddeus announced his planned trip to Charleston, confirming the window they had been waiting for. However, new complications arose that threatened to expose their carefully constructed network. A new overseer, hired to replace one who had proven too lenient, arrived with a reputation for brutal efficiency and an uncanny ability to detect slave unrest. Josiah Creed was a lean, sharp-eyed man who had broken resistance movements on plantations throughout the Deep South. His presence immediately heightened tension throughout Whitmore Plantation. Creed's suspicions focused first on the unusual arrangement between Margaret and the 7 men. He questioned the wisdom of allowing enslaved workers such unrestricted access to the master's wife, suggesting it created dangerous precedents and potential security risks. Thaddeus, still blinded by his satisfaction with Margaret's punishment, dismissed these concerns as excessive caution. Margaret and Samuel recognized the immediate threat Creed represented. His experience with slave rebellions made him dangerous in ways the previous overseer had never been. They accelerated their timeline, moving the escape attempt from late spring to early April, despite the increased risks of colder weather and less favorable traveling conditions. The network began showing signs of strain under the pressure. 2 potential escapees lost their nerve and withdrew from the plan, creating security concerns about their continued silence. Another worker was caught with a forged pass, though he managed to convince Creed it was a simple mistake rather than evidence of organized activity. Margaret's behavior came under increased scrutiny as Creed noted her frequent absences from social obligations and her apparent indifference to her reduced circumstances. A woman of her breeding should have been more visibly affected by her degraded status, he argued to Thaddeus. The walls were closing in, and everyone involved understood that their window for action was rapidly narrowing. Success would require perfect execution, or they would all face consequences far worse than continued bondage. The night before Thaddeus's departure for Charleston, Margaret sat in her chamber surrounded by the 7 men for what they all understood might be their final planning session. The weight of their shared secret had forged bonds that transcended the racial and social barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. Samuel reviewed the escape routes one final time, his weathered finger tracing paths on a crude map drawn on the back of an old pillowcase. The primary route would take them north through the Oconee National Forest, where thick woods would provide cover from pursuing slave catchers. Secondary routes had been planned for smaller groups if the main party was forced to split up. Margaret had managed to steal a substantial sum of money from Thaddeus's safe, along with jewelry that could be sold or traded for supplies along the way. She had also forged letters of transit that might fool casual inspection, though they would not withstand serious scrutiny from experienced slave catchers. The emotional weight of their impending separation hung heavy in the room. Margaret had found in these men the respect and genuine affection that had been absent from her marriage. They had seen past her privileged exterior to recognize someone capable of growth and redemption. She had discovered in herself a capacity for courage and selflessness that her previous life had never demanded. Moses spoke quietly of his hopes to find his wife and children sold years ago to a plantation in Virginia. Jeremiah dreamed of using his literacy to help other escaped slaves navigate the complex world of freedom. Each man carried similar hopes, dreams that had been suppressed but never extinguished by years of bondage. Margaret would not be joining their escape. Her presence would only endanger the group and slow their progress. Instead, she would remain behind to deflect suspicion and provide cover for their initial flight. Her sacrifice was understood and accepted by all, though it added another layer of complexity to their already strained emotions. As dawn approached, they shared what they all understood might be their final moments together. Thaddeus departed for Charleston at sunrise, his carriage disappearing down the oak-lined drive as morning mist rose from the fields. By noon, the carefully orchestrated escape was underway. Samuel led the main group of 37 individuals, including women and children, along the primary route through the forest. Moses commanded a smaller party of 6 men who would take a more dangerous but faster path along the river. Margaret maintained her normal routine, appearing for meals and receiving visitors as if nothing had changed. Her performance was flawless, betraying none of the anxiety that churned in her stomach as she wondered about the progress of her friend's desperate flight to freedom. Creed noticed the absence of several workers during the afternoon roll call, but initial searches revealed nothing suspicious. The escapees had timed their departure perfectly, using the confusion of daily work assignments to mask their absence for several crucial hours. By the time the alarm was raised, they had a significant head start. The overseer's suspicions immediately turned to the 7 men who had special access to Margaret. When he discovered that all 7 were among the missing, his rage was volcanic. He confronted Margaret with accusations and threats, but she maintained her innocence with aristocratic disdain, suggesting that enslaved workers were naturally inclined toward flight and that no special explanation was required. Creed organized pursuit parties immediately, sending riders along all known escape routes. His experience told him that such a large group would be difficult to hide and impossible to move quickly. He was confident of recapturing most, if not all, of the escapees within days. Margaret watched the pursuit parties ride out with carefully concealed terror. Everything now depended on the preparation and courage of people she had come to love more deeply than anyone in her previous life. Their freedom had become more important to her than her own survival. As night fell, she could only wait and pray that Samuel's leadership and Moses' strength would prove sufficient to overcome the odds stacked against them. 3 days passed before Creed's pursuit parties returned with devastating news. They had found no trace of the escaped slaves beyond the first day's trail, which had mysteriously vanished near the Oconee River. Local slave catchers reported no sightings, and inquiries at neighboring plantations yielded no useful information. The failure to recapture such a large group was unprecedented in Creed's experience. His reputation for efficiency was built on swift recapture of runaways, and this mass escape represented a humiliating professional failure. His suspicions about Margaret's involvement intensified, but he lacked concrete evidence to support his accusations. When Thaddeus returned from Charleston, his rage was apocalyptic. The loss of 43 enslaved workers represented a financial catastrophe that threatened the plantation's economic viability. More importantly, the successful mass escape would inspire similar attempts throughout the region, potentially destabilizing the entire system of bondage. Margaret faced her husband's fury with newfound strength. The woman who had once cowered before his displeasure now met his accusations with calm dignity. She denied any involvement in the escape while making it clear that she felt no sympathy for his losses. Thaddeus's interrogation of Margaret revealed the depth of her transformation. She spoke eloquently about the humanity of the people he had treated as property, challenging his fundamental assumptions about racial hierarchy and human worth. Her words, delivered with quiet conviction, struck him like physical blows. The colonel's revenge had backfired spectacularly. Instead of breaking his wife's spirit, his cruel scheme had forged her into someone stronger and more principled than she had ever been. The 7 men he had intended to use as instruments of degradation had become teachers who opened her eyes to truths she had spent her entire life avoiding. Creed pressed for Margaret's punishment, suggesting that her obvious sympathy for the escapees made her complicit in their flight. However, Thaddeus found himself reluctant to take action against his wife, perhaps recognizing that further cruelty would only confirm the moral bankruptcy she had accused him of embracing. Months passed with no word of the escaped slaves, suggesting their successful integration into free communities in the north. Margaret maintained her dignity despite increased isolation and surveillance, finding strength in the knowledge that her actions had contributed to their liberation. Thaddeus aged rapidly under the weight of his financial losses and social embarrassment. The Whitmore plantation's decline became a cautionary tale throughout Georgia, whispered about in parlors and discussed in newspapers as evidence of the inherent instability of the slave system. Margaret's transformation became complete as she quietly used her remaining resources to assist other escape attempts. Her network of contacts, developed during her privileged years, now served a purpose she could never have imagined. She became a secret conductor on the Underground Railroad, her respectable appearance providing perfect cover for dangerous activities. The 7 men who had unwittingly become her teachers had given her something more valuable than the freedom they had sought for themselves. They had shown her how to find dignity in resistance, strength in solidarity, and purpose in service to others' liberation. Creed eventually left Whitmore Plantation, frustrated by his inability to restore order and suspicious of activities he could sense but never prove. His departure marked the beginning of the plantation's final decline, as word spread that the Whitmore name could no longer guarantee the security that neighboring planters required. Margaret lived to see the Civil War's end and the formal abolition of slavery, though she never learned the specific fates of the 7 men who had changed her life so profoundly. She died knowing that their courage had not only secured their own freedom, but had transformed her from a symbol of privileged indifference into an agent of justice. The Whitmore plantation was sold for debts in 1867, its grand mansion eventually falling into ruin. But the legacy of that strange winter, when 7 enslaved men and 1 privileged woman discovered their shared humanity, continued to ripple through generations, a testament to the transformative power of unexpected solidarity in the face of systematic oppression. The story remained largely untold, buried in family records and whispered memories, until historians began uncovering the complex realities of resistance and redemption that had always existed alongside the brutalities of American slavery.